to have a conversation around the latest move by President Tinubu to spend 500 billion as a fuel subsidy removal palliatives. We have here in the studio with us an economist, Dr. Ifediora Amobi. Thanks for joining us. It's good to have you. Now, let's take a delve into this. Is the amount 500 billion naira enough palliative on zero subsidy regime, enough for a population of 200 million plus people?
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, Yanni. 500 billion naira is not enough to, cushion the effects of, removal of subsidy. However, there's the $800 million that the World Bank had already approved and is about to be disbursed. At least that one is a bit clearer because it specifies that each of the poor individuals identified by the government would receive about $8,000 naira a month for the next 6 months. The $500 billion request to the National Assembly, of which the House has actually approved at this time, is still not very, very specific in terms of how it's going to be applied. What is that money going to be used for? Is it going to be an addition to the World Bank loan? Or is that going to be applied to other areas like infrastructure, transportation, etc.? And so Nigerians are still expecting an explanation of what the 500 billion naira request is going to be used for and how it's going to be applied. Is that enough? Well, the answer for me is actually no. Is it absolutely necessary? Well, for me, that's also a bit of a no. And I say that because since we've already, at this point in time, decided to put the horse before the cart before the horse, we are just, more or less fighting fires. These are some of the things that should have been thought through, brainstormed, a team of experts should have actually looked at, and, a clear timetable on how to remove these, subsidies should have been communicated to Nigerians. If it was going to be applied over a year, 2 years, or thereabout, we should know, on a month-by-month basis, how and what is expected of us. That way, the average Nigerian could actually adjust to this, shock in the system, because it has been quite devastating. And so, looking at what has happened so far and what the president has done, yes, it's actually a victory, for him. His first request to the National Assembly had, scaled through. But deep down inside, I think a lot of work still needs to be done to ensure that, the two key things that, keep coming up in every quarter is transparency and accountability. Will it be transparent? Will it be, would we know exactly how this amount of money is going to be spent? Are two of the major issues.
Indeed, Dr. Amobi, I'm still going to take you up on the issue of transparency later, but let me just pick your mind here. If you were in the president's shoes, where should the funds be channeled to? You already said the fact that it's not enough for 200 million plus Nigerians, but what are the key areas that need, realistic pressing problems right now, attention to?
Yeah, well, typically when subsidies are removed overnight, it impacts in two major areas. One is market prices, the price of goods that Nigerians actually, spend their money on, and then, transportation. Not only for Nigerians that actually move around and have to go to work and back, but also for, the transport effect of getting those goods to the market, So whenever this applies, of course, prices are going to go up. And when prices go up because fuel prices have been increased, then it affects everybody down the line. Transport costs, like I said, food prices, now, power, tariffs, etc. So all those things get affected. Now, where will this money be applied to? For me, first and foremost, I think the president, if I had to advise him, I would say first and foremost, put a stop to any further tariff increases in any sector, whether it's telecommunications, whether it's power, whether it's health. I mean, let Nigerians take a breather. Secondly, apply these funds to those critical areas that affect Nigerians directly, which is what can be done to ensure that prices are no longer further increased, and two, how can we ease the effect on transportation on Nigerians? So these two areas in particular. Now whether that means providing more mass transit buses, like some states have already started doing, or working with the road transport unions to ensure that their members don't arbitrarily increase prices. Those are some of the things that have to be thought through, because you cannot say that you want to minimize the effect of an increase in fuel prices on the people by removing the subsidy that some would actually argue that they rightly deserve as Nigerians, since you don't give, we don't really gain a lot more from our government as an oil-producing country. And so the little that we actually gain as citizens of Nigeria, which, subsidy on petroleum is one of the few gains that has now been taken, from the common man. Part of that monies that either are gains from it, or monies that will be borrowed from the World Bank, or even provided for from the National Assembly, which this 500 billion naira applies to from the 2022 supplementary budget, that should be plowed back into ensuring that this effect is cushioned appropriately. So it has to go back to the same transport, fare hikes. It has to go back to the same, markets. It has to be applied in such a way that we feel the effect of this fuel subsidy removal as minimal as possible. And those are some of the areas that really need, immediate intervention. Long term, we should start looking at things like, yes, a more global mass transit strategy, rail, public buses, etc., good roads, all those things. But in the meantime, and since this is actually a palliative, and a palliative doesn't necessarily solve a problem, it just provides a temporary relief or alleviation of an existing problem. So it's almost like being shot with a gun. The bullet is lodged in your body, but you're bleeding, and then you tie a bandage to stop the bleeding while the bullet is still there. So you haven't really addressed the key issue itself. The palliative is just to make sure that, well, you don't die today. So we have to actually start looking medium, long term, to ensure that the effects of these things are, felt by our people.
Very good, Dr. Amobi. Now, in hindsight, it's long been argued that the main beneficiaries of the, the subsidy in the first place has been the marketers. Now, my question, in the long term, with the basic tenets of demand and supply and competitiveness prevail in the oil sector with a zero subsidy regime, you think? How is that possible?
Well, it is very, very possible. But like I said before, this is something that should have had a longer term, agenda. Subsidies are not just removed, arbitrarily overnight. We go from a subsidized system to a zero subsidy regime within the blink of an eye. And yes, it will be chaotic, and it has been chaotic. And the effect on the people have been quite devastating. And so a gradual process would have been better to actually ease this effect as much as possible. So I don't know what else we would have done. And like I said before, we have already put the cart before the horse. And so we are now almost fighting fires to ensure that that people don't hit the streets. Labor is agitating, other groups are agitating, but we have to try as much as possible to ensure that peace is maintained. Let's just try and get it done.
All right, very good, Dr. Amobi. Now, realistically, can Nigeria adopt real-time mechanisms to monitor how public funds are spent, where and when, and impact on citizens' welfare, you think?
Now, that's actually the bigger challenge, and that actually goes back to the transparency issue that we mentioned earlier on. I know that the government had told us in the past that they have a database of the poor and vulnerable. That data bank is probably what has to be used if it is accurate, if it captures every segment and every geographical location within the country, and if it also captures the right demographics, because that would actually be the right way to ensure that these palliatives get to the right people. Do we have that mechanism in place? Yes, we do. Can we do it as effectively as we would want to? That's where the question mark now comes in. How will that be done? Will it be a cash handout system? Will it be a transfer, type disbursement? That's where the question actually comes in, because the poor within us, those who are actually vulnerable, some of them are still not bankable. So how are you going to get to them? How are you going to reach them? If you go to a place like, the IDP camps, for instance, how do you, do you start giving them cash, handouts? So those are some of the challenges that we're going to face, within that. So, yes, I think we're actually ready for it, but can we apply it effectively? That will be the challenge itself.
Challenge indeed. I'm still going to take you on the issue of transparency. Now, if you were to appraise the previous government's single treasury account mechanism on public expenditure, do you think it prevented corrupt tendencies? It also meant to plug leakages and curb multiplicity of government accounts. That was the main term then. And of course, you also talked about these agencies will drive those policies, as it were, in terms of financial disbursement.
Yes, okay. Yeah. Sorry, I actually lost my earpiece there for a minute.
Okay.
Can you repeat the question, please?
All right. If you were to appraise the previous government's single treasury account mechanism on public expenditure for its agencies in carrying out its policies, do you think it actually, prevented corrupt tendencies? Initially, it's meant to plug leakages and curb multiplicity of government accounts. And of course, you also alluded to the fact that there will be agencies who will drive the government's policies. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, actually, absolutely. The single tax account was very, very effective. And it did help a lot in ensuring that, corrupt practices were reduced as much as possible. It wasn't 100% foolproof, but it did actually go a long way. And if I have to give it a grade, I will actually give it a high pass mark. I think it's something that we should continue. I think that it is actually, a policy, or is an area that we should seriously improve upon to ensure that we actually get to that point where we have an almost zero, corrupt or corruption, index objective. And so, yes, I will. I think it's actually something that was done very, very well. I think it was a good initiative, and I think it can be improved upon.
Dr. Amobi, now there's still moves towards refined fuel importation within a no subsidy scenario. Now, with the 4 refineries still comatose and more emphasis on the new Dangote refinery, how sustainable economically is this?
Not very, very sustainable. I mean, the Dangote refinery, has come on stream, and we're actually very, very thankful and grateful for that. But will it be enough? Will it be enough in a no-subsidy regime? Will it be able to cater to all the demand that that we would actually, need as a country? It's a big refinery, with very, very huge capacity, but the answer will be no. We will still have to look for alternatives. We will have to rely less on petroleum. I think the time is actually ripe for the country to start delving into alternative forms of fuel. Some have actually said, well, maybe we should start, electric cars and so on and so forth. Yes, even our auto manufacturers here, Innocent, has already started, researching into that. CNG is another alternative. Hybrids, we could also, delve into that. I think the alternatives are there. Government should actually start investing in public transport that is non-fuel driven. If it's electric, then let us invest in electric. If it's in alternative sources of electricity, like solar or other hybrid forms, this is the time to now get into that. It's a huge area. The future is bright. The rest of the world is actually, going in that direction. And I don't see why we shouldn't, at this time, start relying less on our natural resource, which is fuel. I think we've actually drawn that to a point where, we should actually start thinking, alternatives.
You're right, alternatives is key. Dr. Ifediora Amobi is an economist and has been speaking with us from Enugu, talking about President Tinubu's palliative efforts towards the no subsidy zero regime. It's good to have you with us.